The FIA said at the start of the year that it will reconsider the zone structure for the first 5 races of the 2023 Formula One season. It did so based on overtaking data obtained last year, when it applied new F1 design technical limits to make it easier for drivers to follow one another. As a result, the activation sites for Miami's first 2 DRS zones have been shifted further up the road. The initial DRS activation point on the straightaway to turn 11 has been altered from 30 meters after turn 9 to 105 meters after the turn, lowering the DRS zone by 75 meters. The second DRS zone on the back straight has also been reduced by 75 meters, starting 525 meters after turn 16 rather than 450 meters. The final DRS zone into the short start-finish straight was left alone, as it had no influence on overtaking anyhow. The modifications were made circuit by circuit and are thus unrelated to the DRS reduction at last weekend's Azerbaijan Grand Prix, when the DRS zone on the main straight was reduced by 100 meters. The smaller zones, on the other hand, are bound to raise eyebrows after a highly professional debut Miami GP last year. On Sunday, the Baku City circuit delivered a mediocre race in which passing was nearly impossible, and several drivers questioned why the DRS zone was reduced given that overtaking in 2023 is expected to be more difficult than the previous year due to the increased downforce teams have added to their cars. After being unable to overtake rivals in Baku, Mercedes' Lewis Hamilton said, "They shortened the DRS this year down the straight. I don't quite know why they did that. We've always had great racing where the DRS was. By the time you switched the DRS on, it was too late. Was there a lot of overtaking today? Well, there you go." When McLaren driver Lando Norris was asked if Baku's shorter DRS zone made sense, the Briton added, "No, none." All the drivers questioned it in the driver's briefing. The Miami International Autodrome, which encircled the Miami Dolphins' Hard Rock Stadium, has also been totally repaved for this season. Last year, its initial surface garnered unfavorable comments from drivers and was criticized for the race's lack of action. Furthermore, the layout of turn 15 has been somewhat modified, and the runoff zones at turns 1, 4, 7, and 11 have been lowered and the barriers realigned. The barriers between turns 13 and 14 have been altered as well. This season, the FIA attempted to fine-tune the DRS zones at several locations. The Australian Grand Prix saw the return of 4 DRS zones, while the Azerbaijan Grand Prix had a shorter DRS zone on the main straight, which contributed to the lesser frequency of overtakes last week. Some drivers despise the changes, while others welcome them. For example, Fernando Alonso seems indifferent about the lack of overtaking in Formula One, arguing it is simply the character of the sport. What are your feelings about the DRS zone changes? Are they required to improve racing? Was it a good idea to shorten them again? Tell us in the comments. However, with the exception of Red Bull, overtaking proved difficult for the field at the most recent Grand Prix in Azerbaijan, as drivers struggled to follow cars ahead. Alonso, who finished 4th for Aston Martin, could only make up positions on the race start and safety car restart in Baku, and was unable to pass Charles Leclerc for a 4th consecutive podium. However, speaking in Miami, the 2-time world champion believes that the lack of overtaking observed in F1 is usual, citing 2 dominating eras to support his claim. "It has always been like this," Alonso said. "For 7 years, Hamilton and Bottas were 1st and 2nd, and in the past, Vettel and Webber. So you have the fastest car, you can start a little bit behind and you may still be making moves and overtakes. And if you are in any other car, wherever you're qualifying, you're more or less secure in that position. There are not many overtakes after lap 2 or lap 3, but even here, we could some rain forecast for Sunday. But many overtakings is the nature of Formula One, so it should not be a surprise." When pressed further, Alonso offered a simple explanation for the lack of overtaking in the field. "Because we are very close in terms of performance," he explained. "If you remove the Red Bulls, sometimes within 6/10, you are P3 to P16 and Q1 to get into the next session. So eventually you finish qualifying in the order that you deserved, and then in the race, how will you overtake a car that is just half a tenth quicker? Morally, it is the natural order, so I think that is the main reason, and then it could be the tires as well. They still get overheated if you follow a car, so you need to decide wisely when you want to be too close to the car in front of you. They change every year, a little bit this year. We have a new construction, so the front tires are much more robust than last year, so that is good news, but as I said, overheating is the biggest thing." While the Baku tweak prompted some controversy, Alonso argued that some cars were affected more than others, which is why their drivers were upset. Alonso stated that the FIA knows from data collected at last year's races that both tracks were among the simplest to pass under DRS, and he supports the move to lower the zones. When asked if he agreed with the FIA's decision to limit the Miami zones, the Aston Martin driver replied, "I think so, yes. It was the easiest here last year, apparently, so that's why I think FIA did shorten the DRS. In Baku it was one of the easiest last year, so they shortened the DRS. I heard Lewis was saying that the DRS was too short, which I think for them with the high downforce it was too short. For Red Bull, it was too long. At the start, finish line, overtook Leclerc and he was opening to brake on the outside for turn 1. So if you are one car, it was too long. If you take another car, it was too short. So I guess it was about the calculation that the FIA do after seeing last year's races. Baku and Miami, they were on the high side in terms of overtaking and how easy it was. So that's why they shortened it. Let's see this year, but it's difficult to predict. Alonso stated that his teams updated their car designs to the new aerodynamic rules that will be implemented in 2022. It became more difficult to keep up with cars ahead of them. It's true that this year it seems a little bit more difficult to follow cars. That's 100% correct. Red Bull thinks that the DRS zones are too long, so it depends which car you take. When asked if ground effect was the best choice, Alonso responded that it was too early in the current regulations' life to make a judgment. It's a good question, he said. I think there were higher expectations on following cars, and maybe having the grid a little bit be closer together. I don't know, I think we need to give a little bit more time. If we didn't have the Red Bull that much ahead, I think it would be a very interesting fight, with 3 or 4 teams within 1 or 2 tenths, and maybe we were saying that the rules, they were a success. So maybe this is the story in a few years' time or whatever, when we have some stability in the rules. Then maybe 2026 everything changes again. However, after failing to pass each other on the main straight during the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, some other Formula One drivers questioned the decision to limit the DRS zone on the main straight. According to some drivers, overtaking has become more difficult in the second year since F1's new aerodynamic limitations were enforced. It certainly didn't make any sense that they made it shorter, because the cars are harder to follow this year with the rule changes, said Kevin Magnussen. Also, just the cars getting more complex and the involvement in aerodynamics is causing it to be harder to follow. So if anything, it should be the same or even longer. Logan Sargent also feels F1 and the FIA should reconsider shortening DRS zones. You can't do much, said the Williams drivers. You get stuck behind the cars in front. It's really difficult to overtake and get close enough. I just kind of had to settle in and just race my race. It was a pretty lonely one, unfortunately. For starters, extend the DRS zones as they were last year. We've been making them shorter and shorter, 100 meters shorter this year compared to last year in Baku, and just makes it too difficult to make a move at the end of the straight. After 2 highly processional races in Baku, not everyone was convinced that the DRS zone alteration was to blame. I'm not convinced a 100-meter increase in DRS would have made a difference, Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff stated. Perhaps just. However, his driver, George Russell, who is also a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, raised concern about the decision to shorten the DRS zone and the lack of input before to the start of the weekend. The overtaking is harder this year than it's been last year, said Russell. As the cars have evolved away from the initial regulations that F1 introduced, overtaking has become more difficult. Obviously, they're shortening all the DRS zones as well, which the drivers have had zero input on, and been a little bit disappointed again that we weren't in that loop to hear that. Because I'm not even sure the FIA are aware that we feel that the overtaking is harder, yet they're basing the DRS off historic information. What do you think? Is Formula One going too far? With all of the DRS adjustments, are they making the races more boring? Please share your ideas in the comments section below. Despite the numerous changes, we are excited to watch what occurs at the Miami Grand Prix. Also, tell us who you're rooting for to win. Is there going to be another Red Bull 1-2? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.